Tracy did not become ruthless overnight. She became ruthless the way people do when they realize their kindness has been weaponized against them. In Fairmont Crest, every polished smile carried a price tag, every holiday toast was a performance, and every private sin was tolerated as long as it stayed private. Tracy had spent too many seasons watching that rule protect everyone except the ones who refused to play. She had once believed that restraint was dignity, that if she waited long enough, the truth would rise on its own, that decency would eventually be rewarded. But decency in this neighborhood was not rewarded. It was harvested. It was taken from her in small transactions, being excluded from conversation she should have been included in, being dismissed as overly emotional when she asked for clarity, being treated as an accessory to other people's narratives. The affair between Vernon and Sharon was not the first betrayal she had endured in her life, but it was the first one that made her feel like she was being erased in real time. It lived in the spaces where his attention should have been, in the sudden urgency of Sharon's invitations, in the way they both seemed to speak the same unspoken language when they thought no one was watching. At first, Tracy told herself she was imagining it. She blamed stress, the season, the usual paranoia that grows in a place where everyone is always measuring everyone else. But then she began to see patterns that could not be explained away. Vernon's phone lighting up at hours that didn't match his excuses, Sharon appearing in the same places he claimed to be passing through, the subtle changes in their bodies when they were near each other, too careful, too controlled, like people trying not to betray themselves. It wasn't love, Tracy could feel that. It was appetite mixed with entitlement, a relationship built less on tenderness than on the thrill of secrecy and the power of getting away with it. What sickened her most was the way they carried themselves afterward, re-entering public spaces with the calm confidence of people who believed their reputations were armored. They weren't just cheating, they were daring the world to catch them. Tracy's rage was immediate, but it didn't turn into action right away, because rage alone wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was her own internal conflict, the humiliating fact that some small piece of her still wanted to believe she was wrong.
That piece wasn't innocence. It was self-preservation. If she admitted the truth, she would have to accept how close she had been to the lie, how easily she had been fooled, how long she had been treated as collateral. She began to replay memories the way a person replays a crime scene, searching for the moment she should have noticed sooner, the moment she should have spoken up. Every time she found one, the shame hit like a bruise. But shame only fed her anger, because it proved they had counted on her silence. It proved they had assumed she would swallow whatever pain they handed her, because that was what she had always done. Tracy realized that Fairmont Crest didn't just thrive on secrets, it thrived on who it could force to carry them. Vernon and Sharon were not simply betraying someone's trust. They were using Tracy's restraint as part of their cover, trusting she would be too proud to admit she was wounded, too cautious to risk scandal, too exhausted to fight. When she understood that, her anger stopped being emotional and became strategic. She began to think like them, and that was the most frightening transformation of all. She started gathering proof, not because she enjoyed it, but because she knew exactly what would happen if she exposed them without it. They would deny, they would cry, they would spin it into misunderstanding and jealousy. They would make her the unstable one, the bitter one, the woman who couldn't handle rejection. In Fairmont Crest, a woman's credibility was always fragile, and Tracy knew the moment she made noise, the entire community would rush to decide which story was more comfortable, the story where two respected people made a mistake, or the story where Tracy was dramatic and vindictive. So she built her case quietly, the way a person builds armor. She timed his exits. She noted Sharon's sudden disappearances during parties. She watched the way Sharon would appear calm one moment, then glow with a private satisfaction the next, as if she had just received a message she didn't want anyone else to see. Tracy collected small receipts that meant nothing alone but everything together. A security log at a private club, a valet ticket with a timestamp, a holiday charity meeting that ended early for reasons no one could explain.
When she found a photo in a shared album, an image taken accidentally in the background where Vernon's hand rested on Sharon's lower back for half a second too long, Tracy's stomach turned. Not because she needed more proof, but because she could see their carelessness becoming bolder. They were no longer afraid. That meant they either believed they were untouchable or they were desperate enough not to care. Both possibilities were dangerous. Vernon, for his part, was not a cartoon villain. He wasn't sleeping with Sharon because he wanted to burn everything down. He was sleeping with her because he felt entitled to relief. He had spent his life being the man who held the roof up. Family, reputation, obligations, public expectations. The applause he received never touched the pressure he carried. He told himself he deserved a place where he didn't have to be responsible, where he could feel wanted without having to earn it through sacrifice. Sharon offered him that illusion. With her, he was not the man expected to be noble. He was simply desired. It was selfish, and he knew it, but the selfishness was addictive. The uglier truth was that he also enjoyed the risk. In Fairmont Crest, risk made him feel alive, and Sharon's willingness to meet him in secrecy made him feel powerful. He told himself it was contained, manageable, something he could stop whenever he chose. Yet each time he tried to step back, he felt his own resentment flare. Resentment at the life that demanded so much from him. Resentment at the people who expected him to be flawless. Resentment at the quiet loneliness that came from always being the strong one. That resentment became his excuse. And the longer he used it, the more he began to believe his own lie. That he wasn't betraying anyone. He was simply reclaiming a part of himself. But the moment Tracy's eyes began to sharpen, the moment he felt scrutiny in the room, his entitlement turned into fear. Fear doesn't soften men like Vernon. It makes them dangerous. His first instinct was not to confess. It was to control, to tighten the story, to manage perceptions, to identify the threat. Sharon's motivation was different, and that difference made her even more volatile. Sharon wasn't seeking relief. She was seeking leverage. She had spent too long being seen as secondary, too long watching doors open for others while she remained outside, tolerated but never fully respected.
Vernon represented access, not just to affection, but to influence. Being close to him made her feel chosen, elevated, protected. The affair fed a hunger in her that was as emotional as it was social. The hunger to prove she could take what she wanted. The hunger to matter. She told herself she wasn't hurting anyone, that people in Fairmont Crest pretended to be moral while living like predators, that she was simply playing the same game. Yet deep down, Sharon also feared being disposable. She feared that if Vernon ever returned fully to his proper life, she would be left holding the humiliation. That fear made her cling harder, push boundaries, take risks that forced him to keep choosing her. She began to create moments where he couldn't easily walk away. Subtle demands, subtle guilt, subtle reminders of what she knew. The relationship became less romance and more mutual blackmail, though neither of them wanted to say it out loud. Sharon's internal conflict was not about right and wrong. It was about power and abandonment. She could not tolerate the idea of losing, and that made her ruthless enough to destroy anyone who threatened her hold. Tracy watched all of this unfolding like a storm gathering over a neighborhood that pretended it only ever had sunshine. Her anger grew heavier, denser, until it stopped feeling like an emotion and started feeling like a responsibility. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that exposing them would protect others, that secrets this large always rot the foundation. But the truth was more complicated, and Tracy hated herself for it. Part of her wanted justice, yes. Part of her wanted revenge, and part of her simply wanted to stop feeling foolish. The decision to expose them became a battle between her morals and her pride, between her desire to end the deception and her desire to inflict pain equal to what she had endured. She tried to imagine walking away, letting them collapse on their own, but the more she watched them, the more she understood they would not collapse quietly. People like Vernon and Sharon didn't fall without taking others down. If the affair was already influencing decisions, money, loyalty, family politics, then waiting would only deepen the damage. Tracy realized she was already inside the blast radius. The only choice left was whether she would be burned silently or set the fire herself. The moment she chose came in a way that felt both ordinary and horrifying. A holiday charity event, the kind Fairmont Crest loved because it allowed them to dress their vanity up as virtue. Tracy arrived not to celebrate, but to observe. She watched Vernon move through the crowd with practiced grace, watched Sharon orbit him with the subtle confidence of someone who believed she owned a private part of him. And then she noticed something that made her blood turn cold. Sharon had keys in her hand, and Vernon's expression changed when he saw them. An involuntary flicker of panic he tried to hide. Keys meant access. Keys meant that Sharon wasn't just meeting him. She had been given permission to enter spaces that were never meant to be hers. Tracy understood instantly that the affair had crossed into something deeper. It was no longer contained to stolen moments. It was bleeding into Vernon's life in ways that could not be undone. That realization stripped away the last of Tracy's hesitation. If Sharon had access, then Sharon had influence. And influence meant decisions were being made in secrecy that could reshape lives. Tracy felt fury surge, not only at them, but at the absurdity of being expected to remain quiet while her world was being rearranged behind her back. Still, even as she prepared to strike, fear clawed at her. Fear of being painted as bitter. Fear of retaliation. Fear of the moment after exposure, when the truth becomes public and everyone scrambles to protect themselves. She knew what Fairmont Crest did to women who disrupted its comfort. It isolated them, mocked them, punished them for not playing along. Tracy's hands trembled as she held the evidence she had collected, not because she doubted it, but because she could feel the weight of what she was about to unleash. Once she did it, there would be no return to polite distance. The fallout would be immediate, violent, and personal. Vernon would fight back with whatever power he had. Sharon would turn vicious, because a cornered woman with ambition is often more dangerous than a cornered man. And Tracy would have to live in the aftermath, walking through rooms where people smiled at her while secretly blaming her for destroying the illusion. In that fear, Tracy confronted a final, brutal truth. She didn't have the luxury of being liked anymore. She had to choose between being safe and being honest, and Fairmont Crest rarely allowed both. When the evidence finally left Tracy's hands and entered the world, it did not land gently.
It moved like a contagion, spreading through the room with the speed of appetite, because people in this community consumed scandal the way they consumed champagne, eagerly, greedily, pretending it was refined. Vernon's composure cracked, not in dramatic collapse, but in the smallest failure of control. His posture stiffened, his eyes turned calculating, his jaw tightened as if he could bite the truth back into silence. Sharon's reaction was sharper, more instinctive, her face tightening as if she had been struck, then hardening into the cold alertness of someone preparing to counterattack. In those seconds, Tracy felt a strange emptiness. She had expected satisfaction, but what she felt instead was the sick awareness that she had unleashed a force that could not be steered. Her anger had pushed her to the edge, but now she was standing on the other side, watching the consequences form like waves. The affair was exposed, yes, but exposure did not equal accountability. Fairmont Crest did what it always did. It tried to manage the narrative. People began choosing sides not based on morality, but based on convenience. Vernon's allies moved quickly to protect him, framing the situation as complicated, suggesting private matters should stay private. Sharon's supporters, fewer but louder, painted her as misunderstood, as someone who had been promised more than she received. And Tracy became what she had feared, the disruptive force, the woman who made everyone uncomfortable by refusing to pretend. The pressure closed in on her from every direction. She could feel the neighborhood's silent verdict hovering. How dare she expose what others had politely ignored? That verdict was its own betrayal, because it revealed how deeply the community preferred deception over truth. It also pushed Tracy into a darker corner. If they were going to blame her anyway, what reason did she have to show mercy? In that corner, Tracy's negativity sharpened into something harsher. She began to consider moves she had never wanted to consider, escalating the exposure, releasing everything, ensuring neither Vernon nor Sharon could rebuild their reputations easily. She told herself it would be justice, but she could feel revenge humming beneath it like a dangerous current. At the same time, Vernon felt his own corner tightening, his identity as respected man collapsing under the weight of public scrutiny. His fear turned into aggression, his need for control becoming frantic.
Sharon, terrified of being discarded and humiliated, grew more reckless, clinging to Vernon not with love, but with the desperation of someone whose entire sense of worth is tied to winning. The three of them spiraled around each other, each driven by a different hunger. Tracy by the need to reclaim power, Vernon by the need to preserve legacy, Sharon by the need to avoid being made irrelevant. Their motivations collided like metal, sparking heat and destruction. And in the final hours of that night, as the holiday lights outside continued to glow with indifferent beauty, Tracy understood she had not simply exposed an affair, she had exposed a fault line in Fairmont Crest itself. The neighborhood would survive, of course, it always did, but it would survive by devouring someone. The question, the one that kept Tracy's pulse pounding even after the room had emptied, was whether it would devour Vernon and Sharon, or whether they would twist the story until Tracy became the sacrifice. In that uncertainty, with her anger still burning and her conscience still screaming, Tracy made a quiet, grim decision. She would not be the one left bleeding in the dark again, not this time, even if protecting herself meant becoming the kind of person she once swore she would never be.